Hi parents, caregivers, and everyone who's interested or has a stake in special needs. Welcome to Calm It's TimMy Time. I'm your host, Alvin Keng, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey of discovery. Come and learn more as we navigate the depths of knowledge and understanding about children with special needs. For today's episode, we are going to explore mental health and specifically on the mental health of individuals with special needs. And to share a bit more about that, we have a special guest who is representing LINeTs, or Life Inspired Network Society, a suicide prevention society birthed in Malaysia. Michelle Lim Hui Sin is a compassionate counselor dedicated to making a positive impact in the mental health field. With a master's degree in professional counseling and a bachelor's degree in social sciences, with a major in psychology from Monash University, Malaysia, Michelle is a licensed and registered counselor with a deep passion for helping others. Her journey into counseling was inspired by a childhood aspiration to become a doctor, fueled by the loss of a close friend to leukemia. However, her fascination with psychology led her to realize that she could make a significant difference as a counselor, helping to heal emotional wounds that are not always visible, but deeply felt. Michelle's therapeutic approach is primarily grounded in cognitive behavioral therapy, with a focus on integrating mindfulness techniques and acceptance and commitment therapy to meet her clients' individual needs. Driven by her personal motto of being someone worth knowing, Michelle is committed to empowering her clients to become agents of change in their own lives. Currently, Michelle continues her work as a freelance counselor while also pursuing entrepreneurial endeavors with her online baking business and teaching roles in psychology and phonics. Her multifaceted experiences have shaped her into a versatile and empathetic counselor dedicated to making a positive impact in the lives of others. So welcome, Michelle. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Alvin. Thank you for having me with you.
So, as a counselor, right, have you had the opportunity to help counsel or advise either an individual or children with special needs?
Actually, I've had different opportunities to actually work with individuals with special needs and even children with special needs. It actually started when I actually was pursuing my master's. And when I was pursuing my master's, I was also starting out seeing different clients, and I also started having clientels that were also having special needs that also required counseling support, therapeutic support. So that's how I also interacted with individuals with special needs. Plus also family background wise, I also have family members that have special needs, different special needs altogether, and it also helped me to see the world very differently based on my early on exposure and even venturing into counseling later on as well.
Okay. When you think about mental health, I know in the mental health field, right, when you talk about mental health and special needs, it's quite synonymous sometimes, because special needs is also has to do with the way the brain works, and I think a lot of clinical psychologists are one of the only people that can sort of give a diagnosis for autism or ADHD. But I'm a bit curious because when you talk about mental health, people don't really correlate. When I say people, I'm talking about the general public. You don't really correlate mental health and special needs and counseling and special needs, because I think sometimes there is a perception that when you think about special needs, they are already at a disadvantage. And people who are neurotypical may not understand or know how they think. So therefore, automatically you think they don't really need counseling. Counseling is only for quote unquote normal people. So, which leads me to my next question also. So what do you think is the biggest misconception about mental health, about the mental health or emotional state of a child or individual who has special needs? What do you think about that?
Okay, wow, it's a very timely question that you asked me. Yeah, so I guess a lot of times, like you said, sometimes people do either equate mental health with special needs, or probably they don't equate mental health with special needs. I guess one of the common misconceptions is that coming from psychological background, right, a lot of times people would see special needs as a mental health disorder, a mental health condition. One is because it's actually included in the International Classification of Diseases, number 11, and also the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that is because it's inside the manual. That's why people think it's a mental health disorder or even a psychological disorder. But actually, a lot of people don't know that it's actually a neurodevelopmental disorder, meaning it's not straight away a mental health disorder, but in other words, it can also lead to psychological disorders in the future. So a lot of people think that special needs is a mental health disorder straight away, but actually it's not like something that you equate it straight away lah. There's also research that shows that actually, like, let's say children and adolescents, they're actually 3 to 6 times more even likely to develop a psychological disorder because of having special needs, for example. But a lot of people assume that, oh, if you have a neurodevelopmental disorder or special needs means you straight away have a mental health disorder already. So hence sometimes when people do seek for counseling, especially for neurodevelopmental disorder, maybe they straight away assume that, oh, it's because they need to learn how to manage their anxiety. They need to manage their depression, for example. But it could also be other aspects. Maybe it's about how do they manage their social skills, which is not necessarily like straight away linked to anxiety or depression straight away. So there's a lot of misconception with that.
Yeah, I mean, having misconception, with little bit of knowledge and no understanding, then we have a tendency to have prejudices and a thought process, right? I mean, one of the things that I've learned in my own journey, especially dealing with my own child, is that yes, my child thinks differently. The way the brain functions or fires up is very different. The way my child sees the world is very different. But that doesn't mean that my child is, doesn't have emotions. It doesn't mean that my child don't love me. Just because my child may not look at me when he talks to me doesn't mean that he doesn't want to communicate. It's just that maybe he doesn't know how to. I mean, that's one of the biggest hurdles that I myself have, overcome, which now is pretty interesting, because when I have conversations with my child, it's been very interesting, because now it's like old enough, right? When they are younger, they can't really communicate. They don't really know how to say. But now, because they're old enough, they can share. They can share and tell me, like, I can just equate back to a little incident that we had, and I remember because my son, he doesn't really like crowds, and in a natural state, because it's very overwhelming, either the noise or too many people. And I remember I was in a situation where there was like 30 or 40 people there, and he didn't look that, like he didn't look at peace lah, and I noticed that he looked like he was stoning. And of course, later on, because I'm more aware, I asked, like, hey, was it because there was too many people, or was it because it was noisy? And he told me, like, no, it's because it's not because it's noisy, but because there was just too many people. So then I thought I just add a follow-up question, like, so how many people is not too many people? How many people is okay? And he immediately answered and said 4 people. 4 people is okay. So I'm like, hey, in a group of 4, he's okay. Anything more than that, maybe he needs a little bit more, a little bit more coaxing, or a little bit more time to get used to it. And then later on, I thought even further, and I thought, like, oh, actually my family has 4 people. So he's used to that, But it's very interesting, because I don't look at him as a person who has challenges or disability. I look at, my child as another person who just thinks differently. And in certain situations, I may not fully understand, may perceive and feel in a different way, So thankfully, I have that awareness. But I also notice there are people who we don't realize, we have an expectation that, I expect this person to operate the way I operate. And if not, means something's wrong with you. What do you feel like, what do you feel like we need? What do you feel like we need as people, in terms of being more aware, more aware, maybe when we're interacting, or maybe when we are communicating with someone with special needs, either a child with special needs or an adult with special needs, in your, like, opinion as a counselor, because I know you have interaction with them, and you probably have to sift through all the, sift through everything to get to the person, right? Because the person is important. Yeah, but I don't know, is there any handles that the rest of us can have, either parents or the general public or people who are not fully aware? I mean, unless it's more like, I need to go and get a master's in counseling, then only I can be aware. What's your thoughts on that?
So yeah, definitely we need a lot of different handles, and one of the handles is definitely not just having like a master's of counseling. Actually, I believe anybody can actually learn to connect with individuals with special needs. So a bit of background context, like I myself was exposed to family members with special needs. And when I was younger, I used to be quite scared to interact with them because when they experience like emotional meltdowns, when they're overly stimulated, I was chased around the house and then I was pinched a lot. And then to me, I actually felt like, oh no, like how next time will I still continuously experience this as well? But then actually, at a very young age, I actually started to challenge myself to do different things. One of it was actually like volunteering on a Saturday. So it actually started when I was a teenager. I volunteered at this organization where I actually gained exposure to actually interacting with individuals with special needs at that particular area. And during my interaction, actually, I think what really helped me was to go there with a mindset of being open and curious to understand how their world is like. So a lot of times, right, we think that, like you mentioned, sometimes what we assume may not be necessarily what they're experiencing at the moment. So for me, I'm just being there, observing with my eyes, connecting with my heart, trying to be curious, how do they see things in their way, help me to connect with them at a very different level. And then I realized that even individuals with special needs, we can't equate them as all the same because again, every individual is unique and every individual is special and also talented and gifted in many, many different areas. So that helped me to, in a way, like immerse myself in the environment, learn a bit more, learn more about what kind of stigma and biases that I have. And because of that, I learned that if I continue to carry this into, let's say, even now in the profession that I'm in counseling, it will actually impact how I interact and connect with the client. Because if I bring that into a therapeutic setting, means I'm being very biased and I might carry a mindset where I know much more than you. But actually, even in therapy setting, we always see each other as equals rather than I'm above them or they're above me. Because if one is above and one is below, then there will be like a imbalance between connecting with one another. So one example would definitely be exposing yourself to like a setting that enables you to really like try and understand and see how is it like, how do they interact, what do they need, how do they communicate. So like what you did, being very curious about your son, how many people is too much. Then you realize, oh, actually four rather than like 40 or more. And that's how you are able to also like see things a bit more similarly than differently. So that I guess that surprise me element that you always think about, like, okay, today I'm going here. Yeah, maybe I should have a mindset of, okay, surprise me. What can I learn from you? Rather than you learn from me, what kind of skills, what kind of techniques, but how can I also learn from you? How can I learn more about your world? How can I learn more about how you see things, how you feel things, how you experience things? Because ultimately we can never 100% fathom what a person goes through or things, but we can try our best to connect with them and try and see things from the angle that they're trying to see. Yeah, if not, we're always limiting ourselves to a certain extent, and that also limits how the other person might also see themselves because we might unintentionally, subconsciously like pass on that limiting beliefs to the other person that we're talking to.
Well, I think that's a very powerful like thought process. The whole idea on like understanding, trying to understanding, and I like one word you've been using, like trying to understand their world. And not just getting them to understand our world. I think one of the things that personally I've learned also is like I need to look at them as human beings first. Human beings that can feel, that can that wants to communicate with me but doesn't know how to. And I think one of the other powerful things that you mentioned is, how do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves as better or do we see ourselves as level playing field? I think sometimes as a parent or as someone older, it's not very easy to see yourself and your child as a, level playing field, There's of course that like, I know more, or you should be, or there's a certain expectation of like, you should be operating this way or you should be hitting the milestone, but you're not. How is there any advice you would give to parents who may still find a struggle? Because I know a lot of parents who I mean, naturally, as a parent, you already have an expectation of how or where you hope your child will go. And I think one of the biggest things that parents have to deal with when you find out that your child has special needs, or when you find your child has a learning disability, is that, oh no, your expectations all go down the drain, or you don't really know how to navigate that, I think me, myself also, I had to adjust my own expectation. But is there any advice you can give to parents? At least what's the starting point to progress from there? What do you think about that?
I guess definitely as parents, definitely you want the very best for your own children lah. And a lot of times, like the very best may be shaped by different experiences that you've had, or maybe you haven't had that you also want your child to experience. But I think at the same time, it's also recognizing that every child has their own voice. And if that's possible, it can also be like connecting with the child to see, what kind of dreams or aspirations that they hope to have in the future, where sometimes it may be a mismatch even with a parent's kind of expectations or goals for their child. Because I realized that sometimes like all these mismatch in expectations or beliefs can also deter the connection from a parent to a child, where sometimes a child just wants you to support them in this area, but you want to support them more, in which they may not be ready to be supported in that aspect yet, but you want them to excel or do better in this area. So I guess it's really learning to pace yourself together with the child instead of, no, you need to reach this or we need to do it together. But who knows, sometimes they also want the experience of doing it first and then gaining your support or sharing things with you later on, which I also realized that even with, let's say, my own interactions with my previous clients, right? So those with special needs, sometimes when they come for counseling or when they want to do something, parents expect this to be the thing that will help them to excel or fix a certain thing. But at the same time, it's always, again, going back to the level of the child, what do they actually need at the moment? So I think rather than trying to impose what you think they want or what you think they need, it's also important to go back to the child, ask them, what do they need at this moment? What do they need in terms of support? What kind of support? So again, what kind of support is one, but how do we support is also another thing. So maybe I give an example. So talking about maybe like communication lah. So a lot of times, right, if let's say a child communicates to the parent like, oh, I want you to help me to keep a piece of cake, for example. And then on the table, there's like chocolate cake, there's like strawberry cake, different cake. So maybe the child understands like, wow, okay, cake. So yeah, I need to keep cake for my parent. So maybe because they love their parents so much, oh, I also want to keep one chocolate cake for my parent. I also want to keep one strawberry cake for my parent. But at the end of the day, right, there wasn't a very clear understanding from both ends. Like maybe the parent didn't say, oh, I only want this chocolate cake. But then the child thought you want chocolate cake and strawberry cake. But it also comes from the love that they have towards the parents. Like, oh, I want my mommy or daddy to also have chocolate and strawberry cake at the end of the day. So maybe when they communicate, then the parent might ask, hey, how come you keep for me two kinds of cakes, but I only wanted chocolate cake? Then we actually learn that, although the needs and the kind of wants that we want for each other may be different or similar, but it also stems from a place of love at the end. But I think how to bridge that is also that clear communication. And it's not just about communicating, but it's the comprehension aspect. So sometimes we think about, oh yeah, if I communicate this, they should understand, or they might understand along the way. But I think it's about trying to work more, not just on the communication, but also on the comprehension, like very really comprehend what my child wants or needs at that moment, and how can I play that role in supporting that need or want that they need at the moment now.
Wow, that's very good. I mean, I think you mentioned something quite powerful in terms of the child wanting to do a certain thing because they love the parent. I think one of the biggest thing that is very difficult, and I can speak on my own journey, is that, when you're in a place where your child is very young and it doesn't seem like they're interested, and especially if when you talk about learning disabilities, majority of the issues is communication. It's like non-verbal. They don't even say hi. They don't even say mommy. They don't even say I love you. They don't even look at you. I think a lot of parents, we see sight as like if they're looking at you means they are actually paying attention, which again, I also found out or learned that those, especially in the spectrum, they may be not looking at you, but they are really paying attention,
Correct.
although they're not looking at you. And that kind of also tells us how we communicate. Like we think that only when you look at the person, you're paying attention, but actually in the truth of the matter is that a lot of those that are having learning disabilities, they may not look at you specifically, but then they are fully attentive to your body language, to what you're saying, to what you're feeling. And like you mentioned just now, I've learned that my son do love me lah. And sometimes he may not say it, he may not do it. It doesn't seem like he is, but he does. Now as he's older and he can communicate. I remember there was this incident where he would suddenly come up to me and I was a bit distraught because of work, very stressed out. And then he would just suddenly come and ask me unprompted, like, "Daddy, are you okay?" And I'm like, I was shocked because, if you know ASD, you'll be like, huh? He's actually, but he came, like, had the courage to come and say, "Daddy, are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And he immediately like, "Okay, you're okay." Then he moved on, to do that. And I realized a lot of parents need to realize that your child actually does love you. Yes, they might not be looking at you. Yes, they might not be paying attention the way a normal neurotypical child will, but they do love you. They do care what you think. They might not be able to tell you that, but I've come to learn that, no child hates their parent lah. I think every child would love their parent. And I would say that sometimes as a parent also, we fall guilty of wanting so much for our kid that we have a high tendency of sometimes pushing them away. So yeah, I think that realization is important. We might not see it, but just because we don't see it, just because we don't feel it, doesn't mean that it's not true. Because I don't think any child here hates their parent. At least not when they're young lah, Yeah. So it's interesting. It's like non-verbal communication. How do you see non-verbal communication? So I like your example of like wanting to keep the cake, but I'm just thinking on the parent side, it'd be like, why you going to keep all the cake? I probably scold the person like, "Hey, I only need one," But then it was done out of love, and that's like a total misunderstanding. And I can just imagine how the child will feel like, "Hey, I already kept 3 cakes for you, but I got scolded." It's quite sad, right? Yeah. I don't know. Do you have any like stories of celebration that you can share? Like whether it's your, I mean, like I said, it's a communication challenge. You're a counselor. You are probably an expert in communication. Both empathetically and also body language communication and also mental communication. I don't know. Do you have any stories where you can share with us about how either an individual or a child or parent grow in their communication? Maybe in the beginning there was a lot of misunderstanding, but after talking, after finding out more, after digging deeper, then they're like, "Wow, actually that's what you mean," or and that kind of improved their relationship. I don't know. Do you have any such stories?
Yeah, I guess I can share like one. So this was like a client I had that was a child that had actually like special needs and also at the same time anger management issues plus also a very rare chromosome disorder, a genetic syndrome lah. So this was a case that I guess I was very new at because that time I was also pursuing my master's, but it's also a case that taught me a lot more about myself and also a lot about connecting with the child and also with the parent now. So I guess one example I would share would be initially the client was actually just referred for anger management issue. So of course the goal then usually we will try and work on how do we help the child to regulate their emotions and stuff. But actually along the way I actually realized that sometimes working with what we think the child needs can also direct us further away from the kind of support that the child actually wants. So I tried to tackle it in another angle where to actually ask the child, "Hey, what is something that you would really like to work on for yourself? So what I've heard from your parent was this, for example, but what about you? I want to hear your side of the story. What do you actually want to work on? And then I actually realized that having that curiosity helped me to bridge a better gap, especially building a rapport with that particular client, because not just the way the client addressed me, whether they call me like Miss Michelle or Teacher Michelle, for example, or even Michelle, that makes a whole lot of difference. And even like going down to their level, it can even be sitting down in the tent, doing whatever they want to do, trying to be curious, like why do they pick this, why do they pick that, actually helped me to learn a lot more about what the client really needed. And hence, every single time when, let's say, the parent asks me, so how's my child? How's my child? Is my child doing better in this? Is my child doing better in that? Then I always have to, again, psychoeducate the parent that, hey, yeah, I know initially we started off the session as this, but it's also very important for us to build that therapeutic relationship first and to actually see what the child needs. And from there, once my relationship with the child is better, I actually encourage the child to communicate it to the parent, how they actually feel, what do they actually need. And initially, the parent was also very, very stressed up. I can kind of like understand from like what I've learned in terms of research, like how caregivers can also be really impacted. It can really take a toll on a person's mental health, being a caregiver of an individual with a special need, especially if they don't really have a good support system. So in that sense, having that communication being done to the parent also help them to realize that they are not alone in this. For example, I like the theme for this podcast, it takes a kampong to raise a child. So I learned that even with children, I not only work with the child, but also work with, let's say, the school and also with the parent. And one of the ways that parents can gain support is also going for like counseling if they need so. Sometimes they have so much focus on the child, they don't actually have focus on themselves. And sometimes because they are so overwhelmed, right, they unintentionally like lash out on their child lah. So then the child feels it and then it impacts the whole cycle again because there's no outlet for the parent. But at the same time, the parent is also the strongest support system for the child. So of course, one of the recommendations I did was to recommend the parent for therapy, which that particular client also came to me lah for session. And from there on, I actually proposed like, okay, why not we do like a parent and child kind of session together. So in that session itself, I can actually be with the parent and the child to see how they communicate. And maybe I can also share like certain input. And sometimes if any miscommunication happens, I can also address it in the session. So from then on, right, they actually realize that, oh, okay, why the child understands like, oh, why my parent want me to go for session. And then what is actually happening in the session for the client in terms of what the parent can see. And at the same time, we get to see whether there's any like gaps that each party needs that were not met and how do we address it at the same time. So I guess it's also allowing the parent to be themselves in the setting, trying to understand the child's perspective. And then later on, it wasn't just about anger management that we worked on. It was also a lot about their own relationship in essence. What can they do together? Trying to understand how to communicate certain things together. And I guess that curiosity element added on a lot more insight into the whole picture because the parent then was able to understand that, oh, it's not because my child don't want to do this or don't know how to do this, but maybe there was something happening at that moment that they were going through that maybe they needed help and support first before they're able to do that. So that really helped to bring down that whole, I know it much better than you because I'm older, or you don't understand me because you're not me kind of thing. So in a way, it helped to bridge that gap. And then later on, of course, I successfully terminated my sessions, meaning the client didn't have to come for me for sessions anymore. And the person was able to actually like verbalize emotions much better, learning that, hey, actually anger is actually also part of us as humans. And it's how we actually channel the emotions that we have. How do we respond to it rather than reacting immediately to it? And knowing that, yeah, my parent didn't send me here because I'm a bad child or I need this, but it's to help me to learn more about myself and support myself. And how can we even like support each other in the journey moving forward. Yeah, so that's part of it also.
Wow, that's quite a powerful story. I mean, it's very interesting, the three sentence of it, because it's like it all started off with, okay, my child has a problem and we need to fix it, and then it went from the problem is not really a problem, and the cause of the problem is I mean, not to say we blame parents, but we have a part to play in it as well, unrealizing, not knowing, and it's amazing how in the end, instead of an anger management counseling, it became let's communicate better, let's try and understand each other better, and that kind of helped them come to another deeper level of relationship. I think it's quite powerful. I mean, I've got two more thoughts or questions to ask you. One of course is so this thought process of like, and it's very normal for us, like, okay, I want to improve my kids education, then I send them to school. My child has a mental health issue or special needs, I send them to therapy. But it sounds like there's also an element where the situation at home plays a part in their progress, based on what you shared. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because sometimes the thought process of like parents or people is like, I got a problem, I just go and get it fixed. My car got a problem, I send to the mechanic. But actually how I drive my car also affects whether or not the mechanic has more work or not, So what's your thoughts on that? The home environment, because I'm also thinking out loud that home environment therapy is 1 hour a week. Home environment is 24 hours, 7 days a week. Yeah. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, home environment is like one of the largest time where children and families spend their time in. So I guess apart from school, so probably school could be the second largest environment they spend their time in. So a lot of times, right, the home environment does shape how the person grow up and how they learn different ways of coping with different situations. So children, right, they are very curious one. They learn very easily from observing their parents. They observe even cartoons, observe teachers, and when they observe these things, right, that also will shape how they choose to cope with situations that they face. So sometimes if, let's say, they notice, this could be a frustrating situation for their parent, but their parent maybe, let's say they choose to not talk about it or deal with it, they just keep everything inside, they themselves might also adopt the same approach because they might think it's not so safe to talk about these kind of emotions at home. And hence, they might also play it out even in school settings or even with interacting with other people. So in other words, like the home environment is actually one of the most influential environment that children can grow up in. And if, let's say, the home environment is an environment that is really supportive, is a really warm space, they'll be able to also feel a little bit more safe venturing out to other environments in the world. So it's kind of like a base that they are familiar with, just like the number you give just now. Big for you, big for your son means 4, right? 4 people means big already. So I guess after that, maybe it's whether or not the person is able to grow further than the number 4 also depends whether or not they feel safe to have that support with them going out to another environment and whether or not it can grow more and more in the future. So if let's say 4 already, they don't feel secure enough, then they go to 5, 6, 7, 8, 20 in the future, and even in like malls and stuff, there's much more people. It actually can be even more challenging or even more stimulating for them at the same time. So yeah, environment does play a very, very big role in this aspect. I guess another reason why I'm saying that is also not just about the home environment, but consistency within different environments. So when talking about children, raising children, right, they're like a blank piece of paper when they're born, not born, sorry, born. And at the same time, they also learn a lot. They fill up their paper with drawings and life experiences. It shapes them to be the person that they could be and ought to be in the future. And it's the kampong the teachers, the friends, the family, the people that they mix around with that actually journeys with them through, whether or not for a long time or a short time. But every single person that they interact with has like a ripple effect, I would say. So when they touch that child, whether it ripples to have like a good effect, a long lasting effect, or an effect that maybe even could scar them based on a certain interaction that can then prevent them from wanting to pursue a different kind of interaction that might remind them of a similar thing in the future. So in a sense, that was why in my example just now I talked about not just working with the child but also with the parent and also the school environment. Like, let's say if the child is being disciplined this way at home, but in school disciplined very differently, and then in another context disciplined even differently, there's no consistency, and the child will also feel very confused, like, do I listen to my mom, or do I listen to my teacher, or do I listen to this person? And then they get kind of like, I don't know, how do I cope with this situation? So the exposure is good, but at the same time it can be very overwhelming for them to input, like, which one do I listen to, who do I listen to? If I do this at home it's okay, but if I do this in school it's not okay. If I do this there and then it's not okay, and then it gets like, although like being fearful of a lot of different kind of repercussions depending on the different kind of environment. So I guess as a whole, like the community also needs to be aware of how this could have different ripple effects on different people along the way.
Wow, that's right. I mean, as you were sharing, I'm just thinking out loud, like, oh no, we are raising a generation of confused kids, because I can just imagine it is so different. I mean, gone were the days of our parents where whatever the teacher say in school goes, right? And I still remember when I was growing up, if anything happens at school, I will be very afraid to tell my parents, because it will be a second round of lashing. But now it's so different. Now it's like I mean, I understand schools and all, they have a certain policy and certain way of running, but the home environment is so different. What is allowed, what we actually do. And I mean, thanks so much for sharing, Michelle. I think we got to just be aware that because parents, in the reality is we do spend most of the time with our kids, and we are the biggest influence in their lives, whether we like it or not, whether we realize it or not. The not so nice thing to say is monkey see monkey do lah,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Well, one more last question I have for you, because just now you mentioned about caregivers. I think what you said is correct, because I've observed that the focus is all on the child. So much so that sometimes caregivers forget that they also need help. They also need support, because taking care of, for those who have experienced taking care of someone who is in need, whether it's a child or even a person who's old, like giving care for like a family member who has a terminal illness is not the easiest. What do you feel, or do you have any handles for people who are in this situation? I mean, of course, we're talking specifically parents. What do they need? I mean, you already mentioned that they need a team, they need a community. Is there anything else that they should consider? Because most parents, I can just imagine, especially those that are full on, they're like, I'll do anything for my kid, even if I suffer. But I've also come to realize that in life, like when there is an emergency on a plane, they will ask you to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can help your child or the person next to you. Because just imagine if you put the oxygen mask on them and then you faint, and then they can't get out of the plane because you're also not awake. So what should parents think about, especially caregivers? And there are many parents who have taken the high road by even quitting their job and taking care of their child full time. But what do they need? What do you think is important for them to have?
Yeah, definitely agreed lah. I think like because of the love and care they have towards their own kids, most often they're not focused first on their child. But it's a good thought process to think about. Like, what if you focus too much on your child, that it also impacts your ability to take care of your child or other people around you? So I guess for me, just based on my own observations and what I've learned also, I guess the word responsibility is like meaning that the amount of things that you need to shoulder and carry on, and it means that it's also something that you do to see it being carried out lah. But if I break down the word responsibility, it can also be responsibility. So if your responsibility is very high, sometimes you can actually impact your responsibility to respond in a way where you take a breather, a pause to think first before acting, compared to, let's say, if you're calmer, right? If you're calmer, you're able to think, okay, if I do this, what's going to happen next? So I think sometimes it's also not just forgetting that you also have that ability to take a pause, to reflect back about, do I have these resources or that resources? But what is the current state that I'm in at the moment? And how can I ensure that I can continue like running with this responsibility, with the ability there? Maybe you have a response, but it may not be to your best ability at the end. And I think what helps to combine the response and the ability is really that gap, taking that pause between the response and the ability, so that you have that responsibility to continue journey with the child lah. And one example would be, I guess, practicing something known as mindfulness. So mindfulness is basically like being the here and now, being the present moment. We are living in a very instantaneous society. I would say we text and then, okay, instantaneous reply. We do this. We want an instantaneous thing. Sometimes when we want to help someone also, we want to see progress in the child. We want it instant. We want to see it there and then based on our efforts put in. But a lot of times there's also the process of getting there. And the process of getting there also reminds us to take a step back a bit, observe first, meaning rather than a zoom in lens, we zoom out a bit, look at it as a whole first. What is there out there for me? Maybe I need to be a little bit more mindful about, okay, now I'm feeling very overwhelmed. What can I do to regulate my emotions, to bring myself back to a calmer state? Then I'll be able to respond with a better ability. So if we're not calm, we just react immediately based on whatever that's happening. But if you're calmer, right, you might think about, oh, maybe I can contact this person that has maybe a similar experience. I can draw from their experience to support my child during this point of time, or probably like even reading up more. So I think there's also like a lot of fear and stigma out there with regards to special needs, because a lot of times people see special needs as something that is a bad thing or not necessarily a good thing. But at the same time, I think people, even parents or caregivers, also need to educate themselves first. What is special needs? And if we even like research out there, there's a lot of different kinds of special needs, even neurodevelopmental disorders. There's so many different kind of categories also, to really understand what it is and to educate themselves first. Because sometimes if we just based on hearsay or what other people have gone through, right, we may not necessarily like understand what it is in essence, and that will also drive us to a different direction. Similarly, back to the misconception, like how people equate like mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders as the same thing. But if we look at neurodevelopmental disorders as, a kind of like learning disability disorder, and we be very curious about it, we learn that, wow, there's actually like communication disabilities. There's also like autism spectrum disorder. There's also ADHD, for example, rather than just special needs that people see as just one term. Yeah, maybe people already have a certain label, but at the same time, if they learn that whether or not they see it as a psychological disorder versus a neurodevelopmental disorder would also impact the further perpetuation of stereotypes out there with regards to even special needs. So I think that whole, I guess, in other words, special needs literacy about the topic would help. And then being very mindful, what current state they are in, what do they need to do next to help them to respond with a better ability, rather than just focusing on, okay, this is my responsibility, I need to do this. But it's also important to focus on, okay, this is happening, I have this responsibility, but between the response, I also have this ability, but maybe I just need that break in between to help me to think, what can I do to move forward?
Oh, thanks so much for that. I mean, it's based on what you're sharing, it sounds like what parents can do, or at least caregivers can do, is take some time to reflect, to figure out what I need now. It may not be necessarily like a 5-step, or a method, but more of like, what do I need now? Do I need to rest? Do I need some help? Do I need to, what do I need? And I think the other thought you mentioned is understanding, right? Having further understanding about the situation will help. I like one podcast doctor that I listen to from America. He always says facts is your friends, especially when you are in distress. Because when you know the facts, then you will know what the options are. And sometimes we are stuck and stressed out because we don't know what our options are. We think there's only one option. But actually having further understanding, having further reading, knowing what are your options are really helps you to even alleviate stress a little bit and also to be able to find the right path for yourself or for your family. Cool. Thank you so much, Michelle. I mean, it's been a really good session. Is there any last thing that you want to share with us? Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think maybe just to add on that, a lot of times people also think that individuals that have special needs cannot live a full and potential life, but actually individuals with special needs can also live full and potential lives as long as you're willing to spend time to care for them, cultivate their potential, really going back to what they really need. And I guess the term special needs, it just caught my attention right now. Special needs, there's also certain needs that are unique to them that they also need. And sometimes we don't spend time to actually dive into their needs. But when we are able to do that, right, we're actually able to help them to grow to their full potential. So one example that I have is also like my family members I mentioned earlier. So they are on one of them's on the spectrum, one of them also has special needs. And because of the effort of the caregivers, the parents to realize okay, what do they need differently? What do they actually need to help them to grow? Then they invested their time in them. And right now, one of them have actually a PhD. Yeah, PhD in education, and another one has also written a book at the same time. So in other words, sometimes we just focus this is the path that I want them to grow in, but what is a path that they can actually excel in? I guess that's again back to understanding them, being very curious, and also taking a pause between connecting to them at the level that they need.
Wow, thanks so much, Michelle. I mean, I think we need to hear more success stories like this, or at least stories of growth and development, so that at least parents can have hope to know that their child, maybe it may not be the pathway that we expect them to take, but there's definitely a pathway forward for them. And every child is different, so every child's pathway is different. Yes. Cool. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Come It's TimMy Time, where we've delved into the world of supporting children with special needs through empathy and compassion. If you're interested in LINeTs and what they do, you can check out their website at www.linets.org.my or socials at Life Inspired Network on Facebook and Instagram. If you're in need of counseling or know someone who does, please contact them at info@linets.org.my. That's LINeTs, as in LINETS, LINeTs. So I'm Alvin, your host, and it's truly been an honor to have your company. Remember, it takes a kampong to raise a child. As we part ways, let's continue to cultivate understanding, sow seeds of kindness, and embark on this journey with open hearts. Don't forget to show us your support by giving us a like, sharing this episode with someone who might benefit from it, and subscribing to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. You can also connect with us via email at info@timmy.org.my for any questions, suggestions, or just to say hi. Until next time, this is Alvin bidding farewell from Calm It's TimMy Time.